Good afternoon, my name is Hazel Owen and I work for Unitec New Zealand as an academic advisor in ICT Enhanced Learning and Teaching, something that I like to call ICTELT, ICTELT. I'm sure you're enjoying EFest 2008 and the themes of connected learners, educators, organisations and content. Today what I'd like to have a quick look at is collaborating by design. The potential of information communication technology enhanced learning and teaching is underutilised, partly because, so the research shows, a lot of practitioners find it difficult or they don't know where to start. And there's a lot of process models out there and frameworks to help practitioners move from the work that they've already got and adapt that, or to create new resources. However, a lot of them are quite inaccessible, either by the vocabulary that they use or the expectations and skills that they require, sometimes requiring whole teams and quite a lot of cash backing, which, as we all know, isn't necessarily forthcoming. So what I did was I developed a process model and framework based on earlier examples and basically developed to help answer the question, where do I start? It's mainly for practitioners who are unfamiliar with adapting education resources, and it's a very scaffolded approach with a process model, an example of the framework worked through, and the framework itself, which has guiding questions. And the idea is that you can work through individually or in small teams, which is ideal, so you can discuss points around the guiding questions. It begins from a very pedagogical point of view and then moves to a very pragmatic point. So today what I'd like to do is talk initially a little bit about the background to designing and adapting resources, and then move on to show you an example of the framework in action in Dubai, the course that was developed from using this framework. Then look at how to use the framework and the process model, and finally show you a wiki that I've put together so that everybody at EFest can go in, have a go at using the model and critique it, because it's very much its pilot stage. So any comments, any feedback that you've got would be very, very welcome. Now, before I move on, I'd just like to consider the question, why use information communication technology with teaching and learning? From a research point of view, there have been several meta-analyses of ICT research projects conducted to see whether ICT enhanced learning actually improves learning outcomes. So, for example, Waxman, Lin and Michko in 2003 carried out a meta-analysis of recent projects. They found that teaching and learning with technology has a small, positive, significant effect on student outcomes. These were both cognitive and affective when compared with traditional instruction approaches. In light of these types of studies, it's argued that when used creatively and flexibly, ICT has the potential to reshape learning and teaching, and also help the teacher move from a more teacher-centred approach to a much more learner-centred approach. Another reason to use ICT is that our learners are changing. They're currently entering education and are often already sophisticated users of technology. They use it at home, they use it in leisure, they use it to communicate with their friends, they've used it for years. Their expectation, therefore, is that the curricula in higher education in particular, but at all levels, will include some form of online or blended sessions that encourage formal and informal collaboration in discovery-orientated type tasks. However, Goodyear in 2005 identified that there was often a gap between the teacher's hopes and expectations that ICT, the effect that it might have on the curricula and the learning experience. Quite often a lot of time put into development and so on, and the teachers ended up disappointed and often the student frustrated. Partly Goodyear recognises that this is because of design quality and often because of aspects such as IT support and equipment failure, but design quality, and he says that it varies partly because of design skills and also experience of ICT enhanced blended learning. Those skills are not yet widespread. Also, there's still a tendency for technology to be the driving focus as opposed to pedagogy. As I mentioned previously, there are numerous process models and frameworks in existence to assist in the design and or adaptation of curricula to exploit what has been perceived as the underutilised potential of ICTELT. Some are based on instructional design models and developed from behaviourist perspectives, while other underpinning theories include cognitive constructivism and socio-cultural constructivism, which has its foundations in a Vygotskian approach. However, for any practitioner, there's a huge amount of complex issues around these developments, ranging from the pragmatic, as I mentioned earlier, such as lack of resources, skills, and maybe ownership of a project, and to the fact that some of the process models are quite mechanical and flexible, hierarchical, and sometimes just plain impenetrable. So any design process around curricula and learning will always be underpinned by influential factors such as, for example, beliefs about the nature of knowledge and how learning takes place, as well as approaches to learning based on pedagogical assumptions, and finally, objectives, strategies, resources, timelines, and assessment. On top of this, designers also bring their own philosophies and attitudes, and the educators and learners who work with the designs and the resources are influenced by their own perspectives. However, the fundamental overarching guide is that what the student does is actually more important in determining what is learned than what the teacher does. So, three main perspectives inform most of the existing models and frameworks for ICTELT learning design. These are empiricist, cognitive, and situative. The empiricist perspective, mainly developed from behaviourist perspectives, is focused on things like task analysis and production of a set of learning competencies which learners meet through the completion of organised activities. So sort of your drill type practice with instant feedback. And success, it tends to be assessed through overt demonstration of some sort of knowledge or skills component. On the other hand, stresses the individual conceptual development within the discipline domain. Learning outcomes tend to be couched in metacognitive terms such as self-directed learning. Interactive activities are very important for the learner's construction of their own knowledge through experimentation and reflection. Assessment tends to emphasise broad understanding of concepts, often assessed over time. Finally, the situative perspective emphasises learning outcomes that are directly linked to a discipline's discourse and authentic practices. So this type of approach tends to encourage collaborative learning communities, and within those communities the learners undertake scaffolded activities and formulate and solve real-world problems. Assessment, therefore, tends to include elements of participation and peer assessment. Opinions as to which perspective is most prevalent in implementing ICTELT in higher and further education tend to vary. Canole, for example, states that didactic behaviourist mode, with a focus on the transmission of knowledge, tends to be the most influential, whereas Mays and De Freitas assert that although in the 1990s there was a boom of technology initiatives based around traditional instructivist approaches, the majority tend to include blended elements that emphasise all three levels. Now I'd like to just move on to looking at the process model and associated framework that I developed, and also work through an example of the framework in use. So the process model that you can see here provides an accessible approach for adapting curricula and or resources, and it doesn't require academic practitioners to alter their current practices, something that some researchers have identified as quite important. It has an iterative structure, again, as you can see here, that remains flexible enough for anybody to blend approaches of their choice while also encouraging the alignment of pedagogical perspectives and practice. So it comes very much from a pedagogical point of view, whatever that may be, but that underpins the whole design process. The framework has a set of guided questions that scaffold the design and form a basis for collaborative discussion of design choices, as well as ICT tool selection and the complex process of incorporating a range of pedagogical approaches with a variety of tools. The complementary framework was designed to guide practitioners through the initial steps all the way through to the end product. And to scaffold the use of the complementary framework, there's an example of the process worked through, which we can see here. So what I did was I looked at the guiding questions and put in possible answers to each of those questions, just to model what could be done with the framework. So the main idea there was to relate the abstract to the concrete and kind of demystify the decision-making process. As a bit of an aside here, but very much in connection, practitioners are encouraged to select a resource or a session for adaptation that will actually stand a good chance of success, which could be measured in completion or learners' attitudes shifting or improved achievement of learning outcomes, or maybe just the whole process itself, what you learned from going through the process. The reason being, of course, if it's successful the first time, you'll feel a lot more motivated to go through the process again. I also assumed that whoever used the framework would have access to either experienced peers or some sort of education technologist and IT support, and also access to the necessary ICT tools. So now what I'd like to do is to show you an example of what can be achieved by using this framework. I was very lucky to work with a close-knit group of people in Dubai, where I've just come back from. I was there for 6 years, and I was working at Dubai Men's College, and this group was quite dynamic, coming from all different backgrounds, different ideas, but it was a very creative group, and we'd often have quite heated discussions about things. But what it meant was we took risks, we tried out all sorts of things, there was lots of support, and as a result we ended up with a rather splendid product. To give you a little bit of background to the educational context and the problem that we faced, I'll just give you a quick overview here. At Dubai Men's College, we were working in higher diploma foundations. All of the students there are Emirati males whose first language is Arabic. The majority of the students are between the age of 17 and 30, and some of them are working whilst studying. Most of the students have problems with writing proficiency, and this was contributing to a 25% failure rate in the end of year high stakes assessments that they had to pass to be able to graduate to higher diploma and degree programs. An exacerbating factor to all this was students came from high school where they'd experienced more traditional approaches to education that promoted passive rote learning skills and memorization, very teacher-centered, and asking questions and collaborative work tended not to be encouraged. In 2007, it was proposed that a pilot research study would be conducted in higher diploma foundations, which would document the effectiveness of attempting to enhance the writing proficiency component of the English with ICT, as well as looking at opportunities to scaffold between traditional learning approaches, because a student comes in and you can't just drop them into a learner-centred environment and go, away you go, have fun. You have to encourage students to take on board skills that will help them take a more self-directed approach. The initiative was definitely helped by the fact that students had to have a laptop before enrolling on the Higher Diploma Foundations programme. I can't really talk too much about the whole of the study, the aims, the designs, the implementation and results and so on, but rather I'm just going to look at aspects that are relevant to the use of this particular process model and framework. Having identified this broad problem with writing, it was necessary to find out which specific components of the writing curriculum could be adapted and augmented by ICT. So we got together with 4 instructors who were teaching what turned out to be, we had 2 quasi-experimental groups and 2 control groups. And through discussion with these 4 instructors, we identified sociocultural theory to be the underpinning pedagogical philosophy for the design of 4 interventions based around some of the existing resources that these faculty were already using. In particular, they were based around advantage and disadvantage and compare and contrast essays. Now, having identified sociocultural theory as the underpinning foundation, it was therefore decided that there would need to be quite a lot of scaffolding to the design in the form of models and examples to help support and develop things like thinking skills. We also wanted students to collaborate in the tasks, and the tasks had to have an authentic purpose that would encourage peer support and review. We wanted to help students construct knowledge through guided discovery and active engagement with the learning activities themselves, with more advanced peers and teachers providing guidance and sometimes direction. Tasks needed to be initially very structured and involved structured interaction to help achieve understanding that then enabled students to become more self-directed. We also wanted to draw on learners' prior knowledge, and also partly because it would help in the development of further knowledge, but also because of a motivational aspect. If students had chosen, for example, a topic that they were interested in and had prior knowledge of, it would help facilitate the whole writing process. We also wanted to raise metacognitive awareness of the tools, the interactions, and the processes, like, for example, reflection involved in writing activities. And of course, the overall goal was progress towards greater competence and self-direction. For the 4 interventions, ICT tools were selected from a huge range of different tools, but we decided to use ones that appear to offer the greatest potential for realising the 8 sociocultural factors that we'd already discussed, as well as being readily available and not that they weren't going to create cognitive overload because the students were either using them already or they were very simple to use. Evaluation of the effectiveness of the designs and the implementation, we decided to gather through a range of methods and research tools, both quantitative and qualitative, to create a rich data. So we used observations, surveys, interviews, quizzes, exams, associated documentation. The students completed reflective blog postings, as did the teachers. They also took part in discussion board postings. So the overall approach that was adopted was a blended learning approach, and we used MSN Instant Messenger, blogs, blogger.com, and a suite of tools that we provided in WebCT, as well as face-to-face classroom sessions. The topics that the students chose were 4-wheel driving and laptops, and these were selected by students in a pre-study survey. Ultimately, the 4 interventions were designed to encourage students to adopt a recursive, less linear writing process that emphasised sort of a dynamic interplay of skills, knowledge and revision within a socio-cultural setting. Students were also trained in the use of scaffolding tools and resources. By trained, I mean they were guided in the use of various tools and resources and practices such as time management, project management, and why they were doing certain things. So it's reflecting and discussing the importance of doing things such as revising work, editing, feeding back, and so on. Just so that students could understand why they were doing something. There was a reason for it, an authentic reason that encouraged them to actually go ahead and use the tools. The tools that were designed included, we developed a little course called Improve Your Writing and Vocabulary in Foundations. So, for example, we hosted how-to videos that we developed in Camtasia Studio. We used existing PowerPoint presentations from faculty and added text in the shape of call-outs. We had audio there, and of course images, video that were amalgamated into these how-to videos, and they were used to take the students step by step through structuring the various genre of the essays, the target essays. Also, because of the benefits of synchronous communication, it was decided to use MSN Chat to brainstorm ideas as an initial step to writing an essay. What we'd found is that students identified the fact that coming up with ideas was actually a bit of an issue. They saw the topic rubric and just couldn't think of ideas, couldn't identify ideas, even when talking with a friend. Whole group discussions, brainstorming onto the board was all very well, but you tended to end up with just key players coming up with the ideas all the time. And once it was written on the board, it was then erased from the board. So MSN Chat we decided to use because you can save the history, and it still had that informal type feel to it that's important for brainstorming. However, we'd found from previous experience that unless we raised awareness of the reason for the task, as well as giving a very clear model and guidelines, chat sessions tended to rapidly disintegrate. What we decided to do was make a video showing a chat session that was initially very informal, the big kissy lips and things like that. And then we decided to model the type of interchange that we were hoping students would come up with. Then, as a whole class, they discussed various excerpts of the video, and we encouraged them to reflect on the authentic purpose for the upcoming chat sessions and what the benefits would be. After the chat session, we went round and collected all of the saved chats and then collated the ideas and made them all available on WebCT. So again, you've got that ownership of these ideas. We weren't giving them the ideas, we collated a whole class, but they were authentic ideas. Vocabulary was identified as something that was also really important, and vocabulary acquisition. From the 2 topics that the students identified and selected, we brainstormed a whole load of topic relevant vocabulary, the instructors and the researchers. And what we did was get the instructors of the quasi-experimental groups to explicitly teach the target vocabulary using a range of approaches, including smartboard activities that students then saved to their laptops and could look at later on in the form of sort of like a dictionary. Had a lot of visuals, had a lot of images, and also a range of other interactive type activities. Another tool that we decided to use was the discussion board or forum in WebCT. What students were encouraged to do was to work collaboratively to write an initial essay, to sort of take more responsibility for their own learning in a collaborative enterprise, whilst increasing accountability for their effort. So what we wanted to do was provide tasks that would stimulate real communication in the target language, in this case English, and encourage students to focus on content, accuracy and structure. So the first step of the discussion board task was to complete an essay in pairs, 2 students per laptop, but the other student could have their laptop there for watching the videos, looking at the rubric, looking at the dictionaries and so on and so forth. And the idea was to work in pairs to exploit the benefits of peer support. The completed essay was then posted to the discussion board. We did encourage students to access the scaffolding tools and resources at any point. And what we found was that students, once they found out that their peers would review their essay, insisted on going back in and improving and editing their first version, sometimes several times, and often spending quite a long time on it. So this was, yay, this was a good result. The next step was students would post their essay and then be given another pair's essay to go and review. Now, we wanted students to be scaffolded in the review process as well, because it's quite a tricky one. And also students would sit there and say, well, it's not our job, it's the teacher's job to go and mark this essay. So what we did, we discussed, sometimes quite lively discussions, why it's important to go in and review your peers' writing, and looked at what they would get out of it, the skills, the noticing skills that they would develop from doing this. We also looked at a very clear set of marking criteria that were written in very accessible language, and a worked model was given of the criteria that went through grammar, spelling and so on, but also had example ways of saying you made this mistake here, you did really well here, you had a great range of vocabulary, you used a lot of complex sentences. And then students were encouraged to give a mark. Interestingly, it worked really well, and we ended up with some pretty formative feedback from the students. They definitely weren't soft on each other, that's for sure, but it was actually very useful feedback from the majority of the students. And finally, we also used blogs. Reflection isn't a skill that the students were taught specifically in school, so it was quite a challenge to a lot of students to reflect on what they had done, why they thought they might have done it, how they might do it differently next time. So again, we modelled the types of language that could be used in reflections and the types of things that students might reflect on. Students then were encouraged to go into the blog forums that were set up for them and to make postings after each of the 4 intervention sessions. You'll see here some of the postings. Now I'd like to move on to the collaborative aspect of this particular project. We've looked at the framework and we've looked at the process model, so this is where I'd like you to lend me a bit of a hand. What I've done is I've set up a PB wiki, peanut butter wiki, and I'm just going to go through how to log in and how to use the framework online. So first thing that you do is you open some sort of browser. Then you will see this page in front of you. I'll click on log in, and I've set up, as I say, a PB wiki specifically, and it's called EFest 2008 Collaborating by Design. Click submit and it will bring you to this front page here. Go click on log in, and here you just need to put in EFest 2008 and just click login, and here we are. This is the front page. It's got a little bit of a blurb as to what the PB Wiki's for, bit of an intro that I've put together, some sites of interest if you'd like to go and have a look at them, and so on. Down the left hand side is where all your navigation is. In the sidebar you've got a link to the front page, the home page. You've also got a link to the process model and a link to the worked example. Then down again on the left hand side, just below the sidebar panel, you'll see a panel called folders and a folder called Trial the Framework. Here you can go and have a look at what other people have put together, and you can also choose one of these. You can add your text to here, your comments here, filling in the form. You can do this collaboratively or independently and then get feedback. And what I'm also hoping is that people will go in and give feedback on each other's form frameworks. Down the bottom here, if you don't want to actually put comments in the form itself, you can add a comment. To edit the page, to actually put text in here, you click Edit. To save your changes, don't forget to do this, click Save, and you'll see your change just here. So to conclude, in this presentation, what I've tried to do is discuss some of the central issues around the adaptation and design of learning activities using a flexible, or what I hope is flexible, scaffolded process model and framework. The model and framework for sure aren't new, but they do attempt to meet the need for a pedagogically informed, accessible, time-efficient tool that is also collaborative or encourages collaboration between practitioners who are unfamiliar with adapting education resources. The tool definitely has the potential to be useful for individuals or small teams sharing experience and skills, especially if there is also the support of, for example, an education technologist. Also, what I'm hoping by offering a common frame of reference, team communication will be improved, and this will also increase the likelihood of a high quality, effective end product. By putting everything in this wiki that's open to the public, kind of an open source type approach, what I'm hoping is that it's not just within one institution, but many institutions from New Zealand and hopefully eventually around the world will access this, start using the frameworks, and people will be able to go in and look at what other people are doing and maybe communicate and collaborate further. Of course, further piloting, evaluation and research will be required to assess whether in fact it is a useful tool, and I will need to refine the design. Thank you very much for your time today. Thank you for listening.